Hello guys. So in today's lesson, we will be looking at functions. So let's go back to where we left. So we are in lesson 6. So today we'll be looking at functions. So in functions, we'll be looking at function declarations versus expressions. So we'll look at parameters, arguments, return values, arrow functions, scope, and closure. So this is what we'll be looking at in functions. So let's get back to our code. So alright. So let me open my VS Code. So while VS Code is opening, alright. So let me look at what I have. So I have this here already. So now this is where we left at in our last lesson. So we'll be diving into one of the most powerful tools in JavaScript, which is called functions. So functions help us with clean code, reusable code, modular code. So whenever you are building a website or a full-blown app, you will be using a lot of functions. So it's something you should know is very integral. So in software development. So let's get into it. So function declarations. So in function declarations, you have to you can call the function even before you declare it, right? So now, uh, so function declaration are posted, meaning you can call them before they appear in your code. So what happened that in the memory, what JavaScript does is that it compile all the function and post it in the heap memory. So it will keep them first, then before the calling. So just like you have something keep somewhere, heap somewhere, you are not using them yet, or when someone call it, then you now run it. So that is what function declaration is. So now, if you want to declare a function using function declaration, or you can call it even before you declare it. Or say, for example, I write a function. I want to call a function called greetings. I say greeting. Now I have not declared this greeting yet. So now I want to write a function called greeting. I say function. So if you want to declare a function, you have to use this key name. So this is function declaration. You have to use this key name function. Then you can now give it a name. So here I will say greeting. So I'll say greeting. So then you have a curly brace. So this curly brace is where you write your code, right? So this is where you have your code written. So here now, any code you write here will run as soon as you call this function. So I'll say console, I'll just say hello world, right? So I've written my first function. Now take note that I'm calling this function. This is how you call a function. So if you want to call a function, you use the name that you named the function, right? And the curly brace. So in this function, there's no parameter, so no parameters in calling as well. So we don't have parameters on the function. So you just call it this way. Greetings, like this. You can call it calling or invoking a function, right? So this is how you do it. So this is called function declaration. So if I save like this now, and I go to my run it on my browser. Oh, sorry. Alright, I still have it here. Remember, we still have our HTML code where we have our JavaScript imported, right? So this is the HTML code we are running. So if I go back to what we have here, so now I check, open. Let me open my inspect. So now I have on my console, you see I have hello world, right? Now this is function declarations. So now let's look at another type, which is called function expression. So you will see the difference now. So in function expression, you create a variable, right? So you create a variable. So if I create a variable now, say const, let's give this one, let's say add. Let's add to number. So I'll give it addition, the name of the function, right? So after okay, I'll give the name of the function like this. Then I will now write function. So assignment operation to be equals to function, right? So function, then I'll do like this, right? So here I'll just add to number. Let me just call it a. Let me say console.log. That's console.log. Uh, so I have okay, console.log. I will just say add to number, right? So the two number I'm adding is okay. I'm adding a plus b. So let's say 24 plus 3 or 5 plus 3. Let's use 5 plus 3. So this we also concatenate this into this. So this is not a good idea. So I can put a comma instead. So I have something like this, right? So if I save this, Control.S, and I save, now if I know what happened here, I've not yet called the function. So if I call it before, just the way we did with the greetings, I call it before I execute this function, you see it will throw me an error, right? I call it like this now, call this function. Just the way, we did function declaration. So we call it first, even before we wrote the function, and it worked. But here now, we are giving it constant. We are creating a variable and we then assign the function to it. So this one is called function expression. This one is function declaration. So if I call it like this, now it should throw me an error. So if I save and I go back to here, so are you seeing it now? So cannot access unutilized variable. So it did not work. So if you are using function expression, what you have to do, you can't call the function before you create it. So you have to make sure that you are calling it after the function has been created. So the variable of the function has been created. So you save like this. It should work now because this variable is not existing, right? So if I come here and refresh, are you seeing it? So I have it. I'm seeing it. So that's it. That is the difference between function expression and function declaration. So there's what they call parameterized function and argument function. Parameters and argument are the same thing, and then you have return type. So what do I mean by parameter argument? So what we did here, there was no argument, right? So let's multiply two number now. I'll say multiply, and I have this one is arrow function. We don't want to do arrow function yet, so I'll come to that in a second. So I'll say function. So here I'll pass two number, right? So two number. So now in these two number, I want to add them. So whatsoever the parameters the person passed when calling this function, a, b, I want to multiply it. So I will say const result is equals to a times b, right? So I'll multiply it. I will now say console.log. So I will now say a, I will just say result. Let's give result. And result, we want to give it result. That's what we have here, right? So we want to give it this. So now we have a result. I save this now, Ctrl S. If I go back to my browser, so if I refresh, this should give me, okay, function. We have not yet called this function. Remember, I have not called this function. So we have to call it. Remember, you have to declare it first before you can call, because this is function expression. So I'll come here, I'll say multiply. So now I have to pass in the parameter using specifying for me A and B, right? So I have to pass in the parameter, which I will say 4, then to be 5. So that means 4 times 5, because this 4 now is what we hold this variable A in this function declaration here. We hold this 4. Then this 5 will be for this variable B. I see it. So here will now be 4 times 5. I see it. So that is how it would happen. So if I save now and I go back, I refresh, I see it now. So I now have 20. So that is how you write functions with arguments, right? So there are other ways you can write. There are other ways to return a value. There's what they call return value in function. So you want the function to actually return the value instead of printing. So in real world, actually you will not be printing except for development purpose. So in actual application, you will not be doing console log. So this will bring security issue in your app. So what you do, if you need the value that you calculate here now, instead of console logging, you want to return the value back to this function, right? So to do that, all you have to do is to do this return. So return, okay, you say return, then you now pass in the value you want to return. So this is it. Okay, so you can write it in one line instead of doing this. So you can just do it like this, return this. So what I will do, if I still want to console log, what I have to do here is where I call this function, the value will be returned there, right? So what I will do, I will say console.log. So if I also want to console log, I'll just say result, right? So result here, I want to pass in, I want to call this function. Where I'm calling the function is where this result, so this result will be printed to this place in this console log, because I'm returning the result back to the function. I see. So return the value back to the function. So if I save like that, save now, and then I save and I refresh. So I see I'm having 20, right? So that's what return does. Return the value. If you are returning anything, except you are not returning anything, to be void. But if you are returning something, so the value will be returned back to the function that is calling it, right? So that's what return does. So now let's move forward. So there's what they call arrow function. So in ES6, that was when arrow function was introduced. So arrow function was introduced in ES6. It helps you write more cleaner functions. You get? So it helps you write more cleaner code. So it makes use of function expression, not function declaration. So you still have to write things in a way of function expression, which is what we are doing now. So if I want to write something in ES6, you just have to remove this function. You don't have to use this keyword function. Then if there is no parameter, then you don't have to put this bracket. You can just put so what I mean is, for example, let's create something. Okay, let's call a function that add two numbers. So let's say, okay, let's say constant. I'll say add two number. Okay, add two number. So I will now be equals to. So when you are creating a arrow function, So if you are passing parameters, so I have parameter A and parameter B, then you have to use this equals to and greater than sign to specify. So you can write it in one line if what you are returning, what you are writing is just in one line. So you can write it like this. So you can say A plus B. So this will return the value in one line. So what will happen here is that the parameter here A will be plus B. So this other B parameter. So it will return. So you can write everything in one line. But if you want to write more than one thing, so you have to use this one, this way. So then you can return, you see this, I can also do the same thing that I did in one line now using this return value. So I will return A plus B. So you can remove this return, just remove this and just write it in one line, or you can do it this way. So if you want to write plenty other things, so you have to do it this way better, right? So that is how you can write arrow functions. So I will just leave it to be uh, just in one line. So I think it's more cleaner. I say A plus B, right? So this will just be written in one line. So if I want to call this now, let's console.log, I'll copy, then come here, then I'll console.log result, addition, let's say addition. So what I'll do here is to call add. So add to number, right? Add to number 4 plus 5, right? So this is the function we are calling. So if I save, now if I go back here, so I have 9 now, right? So that is how it actually works. So you can also write a function. So let's assume, let's write another one. Let's say constant. Just print, let's say hello. Let's say print. Let's give it print. Then here we don't want to pass any argument, right? So if you are not passing argument, so you just do like this. Listen, so you can just do a empty bracket like this, and then I can also write it in one line as console.log. Right here, I will just say hello from print function. Listen, so I've written everything in one line. So this is arrow functions. These two are arrow functions. So you can write them in one line if what you are writing is not much. If not, you can write them in multiple line as you want, but you have to put this curly brace if you want to have it in multiple lines. So you have to put this curly brace. So that's it. If I now have to call this function, so I'll just Control C, then come here and then say console.log from print. So from print, right? So I don't have to call it with any parameter. So I'll just say print, right? So like this will do the work. So right. So if I save now, you see, I get from print, but I get under define, right? So let's go back and see why. Okay, hello from print. So you see, I get hello from print. Listen. So that's it. That's how it will work. So this is the hello from print that I got, which why curly print, right? So this what we got, right? So that is it for writing function. So for writing oh, so that is for writing arrow function. So let's move forward. So let's look at what they call scope. So scope define in JavaScript. So in JavaScript, scope define where variable can be accessed, right? So let's do an example now. Let's create a function. Let's create another function here. So um, let's say we have a function inside another function. So I'll say function. So I'll say outer function. Outer function. So I'm using a function declaration now. So I'll say outer function. So I'll let outer var, let's say outer variable. I want to be assign it a variable of I am outside, right? I am outside. So this is the variable, right? So I'm declaring this variable inside this function. This variable is not accessible outside this function, right? So now the variable is scoped to only this function, right? Now if I declare another variable, another function inside, I'll say function inner inner, let me just call it inner. Then I'll write something here. I'll say console dot log. So I'll say console dot log. Now I'll say, so I can say uh, global variable function. So here you see that I have function. I can access the oh, no need to write this. So let me just print out the function, the variable that I write outer variable, right? You see that I can access outer variable from this function, right? So here I will just call the function, so inner function, right? So I'll call it here, calling the function here. So here what I've successfully done here is I create a function that has another function, but this function has a variable, right? So you see that this variable that it has is inside the first function, which is this outer function, right? So but I can still access this variable inside another function that I created inside this function. So the scope of this variable is also the inside function can also access this variable, right? So if I save now, I save, then I go back to my, oh, I've not called the function, sorry. I go back, let me call the outer function. I say outer function. So let's call it. So I call outer function. So if I save, if I go back, refresh here, you see I am outside. That is saying, so I get outer function, I am outside. It means this function, this variable is available inside this inner function, right? But if I create a variable inside this inner function, so let's call this one let's let inner function, inner variable. So this should not be available on the outer function, right? So I am inside, right? So now if I come to the outer function, which this one is the outer function, if I come here and say console.log, I am okay, inner variable, right? Inner var. So this should print me undefined, right? Because it does not have access to this inner variable to throw me an error. This inner variable is only declared inside this function. So the scope of this inner variable is only within this function. So it cannot be accessed outside of that function, right? It cannot be accessed here. Can only be accessed within this function, or if there's another function inside this function. So that is what we talk about scope, right? So now if I go back and I refresh, so are you seeing it? So can't find variable in a variable. Are you seeing it? So this is what we are talking about. So that's it about scope. Now, all right. There are other. There's what they call closure. So I've spoken about scope just now. There's what they call closure. So a closure is when a function remember variable from its outer scope, even after the outer function has finished. So that's what they call closure. It's a bit powerful and a bit confusing if you are new to programming, but it's when you do more practice, then you understand better. So what is a closure? So let me tell you here, closure. So I said the closure is when the function remembers variable from its outer scope, even after the outer function has finished. So let's declare an example of a closure. Let's say function. Call this one make count. So I have something like this, right? Okay. So here I have something like let's count. So let's say let's count equals to 0. So let's set let's count to be 0, and then I will now say return function. So inside this function, I want to return count plus plus, and then we want to return count. So I want to return count. So if you see now, I've written another function inside this make count function, and we are returning this function, right? So this make count function will run and then finish. Then after this function run, we want to call the inner function that will now increment this count. So anytime we call it, we increment this count plus 1. Anytime I call it again, we increment this count plus 1. So what I mean is if I come here now and I say const, I say counter, then let's say counter, then I'll equals to, then I'll say make counter, right? So I'm calling this function here now make counter. So this make counter is a function. I call it like this. Now remember, by default, we have already called this make counter, which is the first outer function. So it will not do anything. So we need to call this inner function, this one that we had return, right? To call this, we will now do, let's say console.log log. I'll say okay, I'll just say first call. So if we call it the first time, we are going to get 1, right? I say counter, this counter. This is what I'm talking about now, this counter. Then I will call it. If I call it like this, I am calling this function. Are you saying it? So if I call it like this, so this should give us 1 because we said it should increment count plus 1, right? That is count plus plus, and return the value, right? If we save now, it should give us 1, right? So we have 1. So if I call it again, this should give me 2, right? So if I call it again, let me just copy and paste. So if I call it again, this should give me 2, right? And I have 2. So if I call it again, this should give me 3, and so on and so forth. So if I call it again, this should give me 3. If I go back. You see? So in Python, it is called yield. So when you yield in Python, but here we are using closure, right? So all right, this is closure method, just an introduction. There's lots to it. So these are the things I want you to know today. So even though we call mark as follow, so this is what are the things I want you to know. So we talk about closure, and then one thing you should remember: function declarations are posted, so expressions are not. So when you use function declaration, so what happened in the heap memories, the JavaScript or the agent, that is the compiler now, we have those functions stacked together and keep for later use, so it will not run immediately. So like that you can call a function even before you write the actual code. So that is what they call function declaration. So the function expression is the one we use variable. That one you have to declare it first before you call it, right? So you can do an assignment. So you just create a function. So write the function to return true or false. So that is just a simple function for boolean, so to return true or false. So all right, thanks for sticking around. In the next lecture we will talk about arrays and arrays method. So this is where JavaScript will really get very exciting. So when we get to arrays and array method and DOM manipulations. So all right, if you are learning, don't forget to like, subscribe, drop your questions in the comment. If there's something you want me to touch about, just drop your questions. So I'll see you in the next lecture, in lecture 7.